Just for the record, to have it on tape, would you give me your name and where you live?
My name is Sue Kunitomi Embrey, and I live in Los Angeles.
Okay. I'd be interested in having you tell me about your family when you were young, before the war. Where they came from, what they did.
My father came from southern Japan, a place called Okayama, a farming community which is now part of the Okayama city. He came to Hawaii first and worked as an itinerant worker on the plantations. And rather than going back to Japan, he came to California and worked his way from San Francisco down to Los Angeles. Actually lived in Hollywood for a while, doing gardening work, working like a houseboy. And then he sent for my mother, who also came from the same area. And they were married in San Francisco, I think around 1910. And then they moved back to Hollywood. And that's where they lived most of their life.
What motivated him to come to the United States in the first place?
I'm not sure. I thought he was the oldest son, but he was the second son in a big family, and I think that he had kind of an adventurous spirit, and I think he wanted to be pretty independent also. So when he reached, I think he was 60, he told his friends he was not planning to go back to Japan, and he died in an auto accident pre-war.
What do you know about the history of Japanese moving to America in the early part of this century?
Well, originally they were recruited by agents to work in Hawaii on the plantations, the sugar and the pineapple plantations. And I think my father had a 2-year contract. And then most of them went back to Japan, saving whatever they could save out of their meager wages. But a number of them came to California, to the West Coast. I've heard stories of men jumping ship in Seattle, coming across the border from Mexico, and also coming across to San Francisco and Seattle, and then coming in legally. About a month ago, I came across my father's passport and my mother's passport, and they never went back, either one of them. My mother went back for a visit, but not till many years later.
What were the attractions for so many people from Japan to come at that time?
I think part of it was there was a lack of food. There was a drought, and they weren't getting, the rice harvest. Also, many of them believed, like a lot of other immigrants, that you could make money in the United States and go back home, and you can build a fancy house and live a better life from the money that you saved. I think that was true of the European immigrants also. They were hoping someday to make a fortune and go back. Many of them did, but my father stayed on.
What were some of the restrictions faced by people of your parents' generation in this country relative to citizenship, property, whatever?
Well, there was what they call an alien land law, where they could not buy property. There were also restrictions in getting licenses for businesses, and the fishing industry especially. And there were restrictions in terms of school segregation. There was a school in San Francisco that had a segregated Japanese students-only school, and I think President Teddy Roosevelt negotiated a deal with Japan so that they came across with a gentleman's agreement so that Japan would not send any more people from there to immigrate to the United States. And there are other restrictions. You couldn't live in certain areas. And that's how Little Tokyo and some of the little ethnic areas began to develop because they could not find places to live.
Did you yourself experience or feel any kind of racial prejudice in your personal life before the war?
Not as much as some people, but we always knew that, you know, there are certain places that we couldn't go to. And in our high school, we would go to dances, but no one else would dance with the students. All the Japanese students would dance with the Japanese girls, and the Italian students would dance with the Italians, and it was very segregated. Although the school itself was not, you know, in terms of classes, but we always seemed to know that there would always be these restrictions. And of course there was restrictive covenants, so we couldn't go live in areas that we wanted to.
Were there public forms of racism, say newspapers, editorially, that kind of?
Yeah, there was a lot of that early 1900s, especially during, you know, right after the Russo-Japanese War. And there were public swimming pools where we couldn't go to. Some Boy Scout groups would not accept minorities, so I know the Japanese community had several Boy Scout and Girl Scout units that were all Japanese. And I don't think that people could go to school after high school, go to college in certain areas.
I've seen a lot of headlines from back at that time, particularly in Hearst newspapers, where they were, I think there was a fear of Caucasians losing jobs to Japanese.
Right.
What was going on there in some of that?
I think that after the first few years, the Japanese, you know, immigrants were trying to get into other business areas, other professions, and people were beginning to get worried about what they called the Japanese invasion, the yellow peril, and they started to put restrictive laws on the books to keep them out of these professions. I know one medical doctor from Japan, I can't remember whether they sued the state of California or whether they were suing some medical association because he could not go into a hospital for his patients, and he was restricted from practicing.